Step back into the year 897. The air inside the Basilica of St. John Lateran is cold, stale, and heavy with the scent of burning wax and centuries of prayer. But underneath the familiar aroma of incense, there is a lingering, sharp stench of rot. Shadows stretch long across the marble floor as a silent crowd of clergy gathers for a trial that should be impossible. At the center of it all, seated upon the highest throne, is the defendant. He is dressed in the most luxurious papal vestments Rome can provide: fine silks, golden embroidery, and a jeweled mitre sitting atop his head. But the skin of the face beneath the crown is pale, leathery, and sunken. This is Pope Formosus. He was the supreme pontiff for 5 years, but he has been dead for 9 months. Standing before this silent, decaying figure is Pope Stephen VI. His face is scarlet with fury, his eyes wide with a manic intensity. He is not mourning, he is prosecuting. He points a trembling finger at the remains of his predecessor, screaming accusations that echo through the stone halls. This is the Cadaver Synod, history's most disturbing legal proceeding. The cardinals in the pews sit in absolute, paralyzed silence. Many cover their noses with silk cloths, unable to breathe the putrid air. The terror in the room is palpable. This isn't just a political trial, it's a theological nightmare. On the corpse's finger sits the ring of the fisherman, the symbol of the highest authority on earth, catching the flickering candlelight. It is a haunting contrast, the ultimate symbol of life and power, resting on the bones of a ghost. As the smoke swirls toward the ceiling, the trial begins. Today, we descend into the darkest chapter of the Vatican to understand how political vengeance turned a sacred basilica into a house of horror. To understand this madness, we have to understand the era. The 9th century was a time of absolute collapse. The Carolingian Empire was splintering, and Italy was a fractured landscape of warring lords and ambitious dukes. Rome itself was a shadow of its former glory. Crumbling Roman ruins stood as ghosts among the crowded, muddy streets of a medieval city. It was a place where power was the only currency that mattered. Noble families, the Spoleto, the Theophylacts, the Crescentii, fought over the papacy like vultures over a carcass. The Pope wasn't just a spiritual leader, he was a kingmaker with the power to crown emperors. Pope Formosus was a skilled diplomat from a different time. A man of deep experience, he had traveled the world to spread the faith. But in 891, when he ascended to the throne, he walked straight into a trap. The powerful Spoleto family, local Italian lords, demanded he crown their son as emperor. Formosus complied, but he secretly hated their influence. He looked for a savior elsewhere. He sent a secret message to the Germanic king, Arnulf of Carinthia, begging him to invade Italy and liberate Rome from the Spoletos. It was a move that sealed his fate. When Arnulf arrived and was crowned, the Spoletos were humiliated. They retreated to the shadows, nursing a hatred that would span generations. But Formosus didn't live long enough to see the consequences. He died in 896, leaving a power vacuum and a family of vengeful nobles waiting for their moment to strike.
Months passed. The Spoleto family regained control of Rome and installed their own puppet, Pope Stephen VI. But for Stephen and his patrons, Formosus's death wasn't enough. They wanted to destroy his legacy and his soul. In the dead of night, Stephen ordered the unthinkable. Workers entered the Basilica of Old St. Peter's. They used iron bars to pry up the heavy marble slabs that covered the papal graves. They reached into the dark, damp earth. The laborers, shaking with fear of divine retribution, grabbed the decaying shroud of a man who had been buried for nearly a year. The body of Formosus was dragged through the cold stone tunnels of the Vatican. There was no dignity in this move, only a chilling, practical purpose. In a nearby room, the sacred robes of the papacy were laid out. They were to be put on a body that was already liquefying. Tailors worked with needles and fine threads to fasten the heavy golden silks onto the corpse's stiff limbs. The contrast was sickening. The finest fabrics in Europe draped over the gray, rotting skin of a dead man. Finally, they placed the jeweled mitre on his skull. Formosus was ready. He was dressed as a pope one last time, but only so he could be stripped of his soul. Since the dead cannot speak, Stephen appointed a young, trembling deacon to stand behind the chair. His job was to provide the defense for Formosus. The young man stood in the shadows, staring at the back of the corpse's head, terrified that God would strike them all dead for what they were about to do.
The trial lasted for days. The corpse sat slumped on the throne, the light from high windows illuminating the decay beneath the gold. Stephen VI paced the floor like a caged animal. Every few minutes, he would stop and scream a direct question at the silent remains of his predecessor. "Why did you, in your ambition, covet the throne of Rome?" he would bark. His eyes were bloodshot, his voice cracking with a madness that terrified everyone in attendance. The cardinals watched, some weeping, some praying, but none dared to stop the Pope. To challenge Stephen was to challenge the powerful Spoleto army standing outside the doors. From high above, the scene looked like a dance of shadows and death. A living king arguing with a dead beggar dressed in gold. The deacon would whisper the responses as instructed. "I have not sinned," he would say, his voice barely audible over the sound of Stephen's rants. At one point, legend says Stephen became so enraged by the silence that he lunged forward, striking the air near the corpse's face, his spit landing on the purple vestments. Through all the shouting, the only movement came from the flies. They swarmed around the golden tiara, a grim reminder of where power eventually leads. The official scribe sat nearby, his hand trembling so hard that his Latin script became nearly illegible. He was recording the most shameful document in human history. The shadows projected on the stone walls made it look as if the corpse was moving, shifting in its seat as the trial dragged on. Finally, Stephen reached his limit. He grabbed the front of Formosus's robes, pulling the rotting body forward until it was inches from his own face. "Guilty!" Stephen yelled. He took up the gavel and slammed it into the stone table with such force that a cloud of dust erupted, sealing the fate of a man who was already beyond the reach of human law. A single cardinal lowered his head and shielded his eyes. He knew that after this day, the papacy would never be the same. The verdict was only the beginning. Now came the desecration. A sharp iron knife was brought forth, its blade glinting in the dim light of the candles. The executioner stepped forward. He grabbed the corpse's right hand, the hand used to give the papal blessing. He hacked off the 3 fingers used for that sacred gesture. Next, they stripped him. They tore the silks and fine linens from the body, leaving the gray, naked remains of Formosus exposed for all to see. The body was no longer a defendant. It was garbage. They dragged it out of the courtroom, through the basilica, its head bouncing hollowly on the stone steps. Stephen handed the body over to an angry mob. They tied it with ropes and dragged it through the filth and mud of the Roman streets, mocking the man they once hailed as their leader.
They reached the banks of the Tiber River. The water was dark, swirling with the debris of the city, hidden in a thick night mist. With a final insulting shove, they tossed the remains of Formosus into the water. A heavy splash echoed under the stone bridge, and the Tiber swallowed the Pope. For days, the body of Formosus drifted in the murky waters, bobbing face down under the moonlight, a silent witness to the madness of the city. Stephen stood on the bank, watching the water. He believed he had won. He believed he had erased his enemy from the annals of time. As the torches of the mob faded into the night, a chilling silence fell over Rome. But the story was far from over. As the corpse sank into the deep silt of the river, the whispers of a miracle began to spread through the tenements of the poor. A single crow watched from the bridge, a dark sentinel over a dark river.
Justice, or perhaps karma, came quickly. The Roman public was horrified by the Cadaver Synod. Within months, a rebellion broke out. Stephen was seized by a mob, stripped of his power, and thrown into a dungeon. In the damp darkness of that prison, a different pair of hands held the rope. The same violence Stephen had unleashed on the dead was now coming for his living throat. In his final moments, Stephen realized that his war on the dead had only summoned his own destruction. He was strangled to death in the shadows of his own cell. According to legend, the body of Formosus washed ashore soon after. Legend says it was glowing with a strange, holy light, and that those who touched it were healed of their ailments. A humble hermit found the remains and protected them, keeping the dead pope safe until the political tides turned once again. Ultimately, a new pope officially annulled the Cadaver Synod. Formosus was exonerated, reburied with honors, and his statue was restored to its place of dignity. Today, the Tiber flows quietly past the Vatican. The Cadaver Synod remains a dark, unbelievable scar on history, a reminder that in the search for power, even the grave offers no sanctuary. If you stood in that courtroom, would you have spoken up or stayed silent in the shadows? Let us know in the comments below. For more stories from the dark side of history, subscribe to Obscure Ages. The past is never as dead as it seems.